The horse collapsed beneath her just as the wind shrieked like a living thing, and Rebecca Vaughn knew in that terrible moment that she was going to die in this god-forsaken blizzard somewhere in the mountains above Bodie, California. She hit the frozen ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Snow swirled around her in blinding sheets, turning the world into a maelstrom of white and howling darkness. The horse, a sturdy mare she had rented in town just that morning, struggled to its feet and immediately bolted into the storm, disappearing within seconds. Rebecca tried to call out, but her voice was lost in the wind. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, her fingers already numb inside her leather gloves, and looked around desperately for any sign of the guide she had hired. Thomas Wheeler had come highly recommended by the hotel proprietor in Bodie. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, they said. He had guided dozens of travelers through to the mining camps on the other side of the Sierra Nevada. But when the blizzard had descended upon them with terrifying speed just 2 hours ago, Wheeler had changed. His easy confidence had evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed panic. He had shouted something at her about saving himself, about how she should never have insisted they leave despite the threatening clouds, and then he had spurred his horse forward and vanished into the white void. That had been over an hour ago, and Rebecca had been trying to follow what she thought was the trail ever since. Now, horseless and completely disoriented, she realized the full horror of her situation. She was alone in a blizzard in the Sierra Nevada mountains in late February of 1876, with no shelter, rapidly failing visibility, and no one who knew where she was except a coward who had abandoned her to save his own skin. Her teeth chattered violently as she forced herself to stand. She had to keep moving. That much she knew. To stop moving meant to freeze, and to freeze meant death. She wrapped her woolen coat more tightly around herself, pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth, and began to walk. She had no idea if she was heading towards safety or deeper into the wilderness, but staying still was not an option. Rebecca had come to California 3 months ago from Philadelphia, where she had worked as a teacher in a girls' school. When her Aunt Martha had written with news that she was running a boarding house in the mining town of Aurora, Nevada, and needed help, Rebecca had jumped at the chance for adventure. The journey west had been long but thrilling, and she had fallen in love with the wild, open landscapes so different from the crowded streets of her childhood. She had stayed in Bodie for a few days, fascinated by the rough mining town perched at 8,000 feet above sea level, before deciding to continue on to Aurora. The guide had seemed trustworthy. The weather had seemed manageable. How quickly everything had fallen apart. The wind pushed against her like a physical force, trying to knock her down. Snow clung to her eyelashes and froze there, making it even harder to see. Her skirts, heavy with accumulated snow and ice, dragged at her legs with every step. She stumbled over hidden rocks and roots, fell to her knees twice, and each time it was harder to get back up. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her movements sluggish and her thoughts fuzzy. She knew these were dangerous signs, but knowing did not help her fight them. Time became meaningless. She might have been walking for minutes or hours. The world had shrunk to just the next step, and the next, and the next. Her mind began to wander. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years past. She thought of her students back in Philadelphia, their eager young faces as she taught them literature and history. She thought of all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the places she had wanted to see. It seemed impossibly cruel that it would end here, alone in the snow, before she had turned 23. She did not see the steep drop until she was falling. One moment there was ground beneath her feet. The next there was nothing. She tumbled down a snow-covered slope, unable to stop herself, her body bouncing off rocks and tree stumps. She came to rest finally at the bottom of what might have been a ravine or a creek bed, the impact driving what little breath she had left from her lungs. Pain bloomed in her left ankle and her right shoulder. When she tried to move, the pain in her ankle became a white, hot spike that made her cry out. She lay there in the snow, unable to stand, unable to do anything but curl into a ball and try to conserve what warmth she had left. The wind was slightly less fierce here in the ravine, but that was small comfort. She was injured, lost, and alone. No one would find her here. No one even knew where to look. Thomas Wheeler, if he had survived, would certainly not tell anyone he had abandoned her. She closed her eyes and felt hot tears freeze on her cheeks. She did not know how long she lay there, long enough for the snow to begin covering her, long enough for her shivering to gradually slow and then stop altogether, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign, long enough for drowsiness to creep over her despite the cold, or perhaps because of it. She felt oddly warm now, which made no sense, but she was too tired to think about it. Sleep seemed like such a good idea. Just a little rest, and then she would figure out what to do. She was drifting into unconsciousness when she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A voice, distant and muffled, calling out. She thought she might be hallucinating, her dying brain conjuring comfort where there was none. But then she heard it again, closer this time, and with it the sound of a horse whinnying. She tried to call back but managed only a weak croak. She tried again, forcing air through her frozen throat, and this time produced something that might have been recognizable as a human voice. She kept calling, using the last of her strength, until she heard boots crunching through snow very close by, and then a man's voice saying words she could not quite make out. Strong hands touched her, brushing snow away from her face. She forced her eyes open and saw through blurred vision a face looking down at her. A man's face, weathered and stubbled, with intense dark eyes and a look of fierce concentration. He was saying something, but she could not understand him over the roaring in her ears. She felt herself being lifted, felt the strange sensation of movement, and then there was warmth. Blessed, beautiful warmth. She was being held against a solid chest, wrapped in what felt like a heavy coat. The world swayed rhythmically, and she realized dimly that she was on a horse. She tried to speak, to ask who he was and where he was taking her, but her lips would not form the words. The warmth and the motion were lulling her towards sleep again, and this time she did not fight it. Whoever had found her, whatever was happening, was beyond her control now. She let the darkness take her. She woke to the crackle of fire and the smell of wood smoke. Her whole body ached, but she was warm. Blessedly, wonderfully warm. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in heavy blankets, and there was heat radiating nearby. She opened her eyes cautiously and found herself staring at rough wooden walls illuminated by flickering firelight. She was in some kind of cabin, small and rustic, but solid and dry. She turned her head, sending a spike of pain through her neck, and saw a man crouched by the fireplace, feeding wood into the flames. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and strong, capable hands. He wore a simple flannel shirt and dark trousers, and his movements had the easy competence of someone completely comfortable in his environment. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and she found herself looking into the same dark eyes she had seen in the snow. "You are awake," he said, and his voice was deep and calm. "That is good. I was worried." Rebecca tried to speak, but her throat was painfully dry. He seemed to understand because he reached for a tin cup nearby and brought it to her. He helped her sit up enough to drink, supporting her with one arm while holding the cup to her lips with his other hand. The water was cool and sweet, and she drank gratefully. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Not too much at once." When she had finished, he eased her back down onto the blankets. She realized she was on some kind of cot or low bed. Her coat and outer layers had been removed, but she was still wearing her dress and undergarments, and someone had wrapped her feet in thick wool socks. "Where am I?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse and weak. "My cabin," he said, "about 4 miles west of where I found you. You are lucky to be alive. Another hour, and you would not have been. Who are you? Nathan Lawrence, he said. I run cattle in these mountains. Or I did, before the winter. Right now, I am just trying to keep myself and my stock alive until spring. I am Rebecca Vaughn, she said, from Philadelphia. Originally, I mean. I was traveling from Bodie to Aurora when the storm hit. His expression darkened slightly. Where is your guide? The memory came flooding back, and with it a surge of anger and humiliation. He left me. When the blizzard got bad, he panicked and rode off. My horse threw me and ran away, and I have been lost ever since. I do not even know how long I was out there. Nathan's jaw tightened. Who was he? This guide? Thomas Wheeler. The hotel in Bodie recommended him. I know Wheeler, Nathan said, and there was steel in his voice now. When this storm clears, there will be words about this. No man worth calling himself one abandons a woman to die in a blizzard. How did you find me? Rebecca asked. I was in a ravine, half buried. You could not have seen me. I heard you, he said simply. I was out checking on a line shack where I keep some of the cattle sheltered during storms. On my way back, the wind shifted for just a moment, and I heard what sounded like someone calling. I almost thought I had imagined it, but something made me go investigate. I found your tracks, and then I found you. He paused. It was Providence, Miss Vaughn. Nothing else explains it. I should not have heard you over that wind, and I should not have found you in the dark with snow covering everything. But I did. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. You saved my life, Mr. Lawrence. I do not know how I can ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, he said firmly. Any decent person would have done the same. He stood up and moved back to the fireplace. You need to rest now. You were badly hypothermic when I found you, and your ankle is either badly sprained or broken. I have splinted it as best I can, but you will not be walking on it for a while. As if his words had given her permission to feel it, pain flared in her ankle. She looked down and saw that her right foot was indeed wrapped and supported by rough splints. How long will the storm last? She asked. Nathan glanced toward the cabin's single window, which showed nothing but white darkness beyond. Hard to say. Could be another day. Could be 3. These late winter storms in the high country can be unpredictable, but we have enough food and firewood to last a week if need be. You are safe here, Miss Vaughn. The combination of warmth, exhaustion, and the reassuring presence of her rescuer was making Rebecca drowsy again. She fought it for a moment, feeling that she should stay awake, that there were more questions she should ask, but her body had other ideas. Nathan seemed to notice. Sleep, he said gently. Your body needs it to heal. I will keep the fire going and keep watch. You are safe, I promise you. Rebecca let her eyes close, and this time when sleep took her, it was deep and peaceful. When she woke again, light was coming through the window. Pale, gray light, but light nonetheless. The storm still raged outside. She could hear the wind howling, but it was day. She felt stronger now, though her body was stiff and sore in a dozen places. She became aware that she needed to attend to certain necessities, which presented an awkward problem. Nathan was sitting at a small table near the window, working on something with his hands. When he saw her stirring, he set his work aside and came over. How are you feeling? Better, she said, and it was true. But I need to. That is, I require... Understanding crossed his face. Of course, there is a chamber pot under the bed, but given your ankle, you will need help standing. I will assist you to your feet. Turn my back and stay close enough to help if you need it, but I will not look. Will that suffice? Rebecca felt her face burn with embarrassment, but there was no help for it. Yes, thank you. He was as good as his word, helping her stand on her one good foot with an arm around her waist, then immediately turning away to give her privacy while remaining close enough to catch her if she fell. The whole process was awkward and humiliating, But Nathan never made her feel anything but respected. When she was finished and back on the cot, he carried the chamber pot outside without comment to empty it. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, he brought with him a blast of cold air and the smell of winter. The storm is still fierce, he reported. Visibility is near zero. We will be here at least another day, I would wager. I am sorry to be such a burden, Rebecca said. He looked at her with surprise. You are not a burden, Miss Vaughn. You are a person who needed help, and I am glad I was able to provide it. He moved to the small stove in one corner and began preparing something. Are you hungry? I have salt pork and beans, some hardtack, and coffee. Not fancy, but it will keep you strong. It sounds wonderful, Rebecca said honestly. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Probably breakfast yesterday morning before setting out with Wheeler. As Nathan cooked, Rebecca looked around the cabin more carefully. It was indeed small, perhaps 15 feet by 20 feet, with the single window, the fireplace, the small stove, the cot she was on, the table, and 2 chairs, and not much else. There were shelves with supplies, hooks on the wall, holding various tools and equipment, and in one corner what looked like a pile of furs and blankets that might serve as another sleeping area. Everything was rough but clean and well maintained. Do you live here? She asked. Or is this a temporary shelter? Bit of both, Nathan said as he stirred the pot on the stove. I have a main house about 8 miles south, down in a valley where the grazing is good. But I built this cabin a few years back as a line shack, a place to stay when I am working the upper pastures or when weather traps me up here. This winter has been harsh enough that I have been spending more time here than usual, keeping an eye on the cattle I keep in the high country. Are you from California originally? Rebecca asked, finding herself curious about this man who had saved her life. Born in Missouri, he said, came west with my father when I was 15, back in 1867. He wanted to try his hand at mining, made his way to the camps around Aurora and Bodie. He did all right, enough to buy some land and some cattle. When he died 3 years ago, I inherited it all. I never had much interest in mining myself. I prefer working with livestock and land. He glanced over at her. What brings a Philadelphia teacher to the wilds of Nevada territory? My Aunt Martha runs a boarding house in Aurora, Rebecca explained. She wrote asking if I would come help her manage it. I had been teaching for 4 years at the same school, living in the same boarding house, seeing the same streets every day. When her letter came, it felt like a door opening, a chance for something different, something more. And instead you nearly died in a blizzard, Nathan said with a slight smile that softened his weathered features. Some adventure. It has certainly been memorable, Rebecca said dryly, and was rewarded with a quiet laugh. They ate together, Nathan bringing her a tin plate piled with food and settling himself at the table with his own. The food was simple but delicious, or perhaps she was just starving. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing easily despite the strangeness of their situation. Nathan told her about ranching in the high country, about the challenges of the Sierra Nevada winters, about the cattle drives down to Sacramento, and the difficulties of getting a fair price from buyers. Rebecca told him about Philadelphia, about teaching young girls who mostly wanted to talk about boys and fashion, but who occasionally showed flashes of genuine intellectual curiosity, about the crowded cities and how different everything was out here in the West. Do you miss it? Nathan asked. The city? The teaching? Rebecca considered the question. I miss some of my students, she admitted. There were a few who were truly bright, who would have benefited from more opportunities than they would likely get. But the city itself? No. I felt suffocated there. Everyone knowing everyone's business, the expectations about what a woman should be and do. Out here, it feels like there is more space to breathe, more room to be whoever you want to be. The West can be hard, though, Nathan said, especially for women, especially alone. I am not alone, Rebecca said. Or I will not be. once I reach Aurora and my aunt. And I think I would rather face hardship with freedom than comfort with constraint. Something in Nathan's expression shifted, a look of understanding and perhaps respect. I know what you mean, he said quietly. That is part of why I stayed after my father died. I could have sold everything and gone back to Missouri, lived comfortably enough on what the land would bring. But here, I am my own man. I answer to no one but myself and the land. The storm continued to rage outside as the day wore on. Nathan kept busy with small tasks, mending some leather tack, sharpening a knife, organizing supplies. Rebecca dozed on and off, her body still recovering from the ordeal. When she was awake, they talked more, and Rebecca found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. Nathan was quiet and thoughtful, but when he spoke, his words had weight. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged occasionally, and he asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her answers. As evening approached and Nathan lit a kerosene lamp to supplement the firelight, Rebecca asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Where will you sleep tonight? I am on the only bed." "I will be fine on the floor by the fire," Nathan said. "I have done it many times. I have plenty of blankets and furs." "That does not seem fair," Rebecca protested. "You saved my life and took me into your home. The least I can do is not take your bed." "You are injured and recovering," Nathan said firmly. "You need the bed more than I do. I will hear no more argument about it." There was something in his tone that told Rebecca the discussion was closed. She subsided, though she still felt guilty about it. That night, as she lay in the darkness listening to the wind howl and the fire crackle, she found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday morning, she had been a traveler with a plan, confident in her guide and her destination. Yesterday evening, she had been dying alone in the snow, and now here she was, warm and safe in a cabin with a man she had never met before, a man who had risked his own life to save hers. She looked across the cabin to where Nathan lay, rolled in blankets by the fire. She could just make out his form in the dim light. He had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, treating her with a consideration that some men back east, who called themselves gentlemen, could learn from. There was something solid and reassuring about him, something that made her feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with the sturdy walls of the cabin. She fell asleep thinking about his dark eyes and the quiet competence in his every movement. The next day, the storm began to ease. The wind was still strong, but the snow had lessened to scattered flurries, and visibility had improved enough to see the shapes of trees beyond the cabin. Nathan ventured outside several times to check on his cattle and to assess the situation. Each time he returned, he brought news. "The main force of the storm has passed," he said after his midday trip. "We got at least 3 feet of new snow, maybe more in the drifts. The trails will be difficult for a few days until things settle." "How long before I can travel?" Rebecca asked, though part of her was not entirely eager to leave. The cabin was cozy, and the company was pleasant. "Your ankle is the biggest concern," Nathan said. He came over and gently examined her foot, his touch professional and careful. Rebecca tried to ignore the way her skin tingled where his fingers brushed it. "There is still significant swelling. If it is broken, you should not put weight on it for several weeks. If it is only a bad sprain, maybe a week or 10 days. Either way, you will not be going anywhere for a while." "But my aunt will be worried," Rebecca said. "I was supposed to arrive days ago. She will think something terrible has happened." "Something terrible did happen," Nathan pointed out. "But you survived. As soon as the trails are passable, I can ride to Aurora and get word to her. It is only about 15 miles from here, a few hours on a good horse in decent weather. She can know you are safe, and we can figure out arrangements to get you there when you are healed enough to travel." The practicality of this suggestion helped ease Rebecca's worry. "That would be very kind of you." "In the meantime," Nathan said, "we are stuck with each other's company. I hope you do not find that too terrible a prospect." On the contrary, Rebecca said, surprising herself with her boldness, I find I quite enjoy your company, Mr. Lawrence. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. Nathan, please. I think we are past formalities, given that I have carried you 4 miles through a blizzard and you have been sleeping in my bed. Rebecca felt herself blush, but smiled back. Nathan, then. And you should call me Rebecca. Rebecca, he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. Over the next several days, as Rebecca's strength returned and the weather continued to improve, they settled into a comfortable routine. Nathan would go out each morning to tend to his cattle and check the conditions. He would return with reports of the snow slowly melting, the trails gradually becoming passable. He would cook simple meals and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Nathan working on various tasks, while Rebecca, frustrated by her immobility, finally convinced him to let her do something useful. He brought her some of his shirts that needed mending, and she set to work with needle and thread, glad to have something productive to do. As they talked, Rebecca learned more about Nathan's life. He had essentially been alone since his father died, running the ranch by himself with occasional help from drifters passing through. He had no family left that he knew of, his mother having died when he was young and his father having been an only child. He rarely went into town except when necessary, preferring the solitude of the mountains. Does it not get lonely? Rebecca asked one evening, as she worked on a particularly stubborn tear in a shirt sleeve. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Sometimes, he admitted, especially in winter when the work is slow and the nights are long. But I have never been comfortable around crowds of people. I prefer the company of animals and the land. They are honest in a way people often are not. That sounds like you have been disappointed by people before, Rebecca said gently. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. There was a woman a few years back. Met her in Bodie. She was a merchant's daughter, pretty and refined. She seemed interested in me, and I thought maybe I could have both this life and a companion to share it with. But when she saw the reality of what living up here meant, the isolation and the hard work and the rough conditions, she left. Told me she could not imagine wasting her life in the wilderness with a man who was barely better than a hermit. Rebecca felt a flash of anger toward this unknown woman. Then she was a fool, she said firmly. There is nothing shameful about the life you have built. You are independent and skilled and good. Those are qualities worth far more than whatever shallow comforts she wanted. Nathan looked at her with surprise and something else, something warmer. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more than you might think. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Rebecca felt something shift between them. It was not just gratitude anymore, not just the natural camaraderie of two people thrown together by circumstance. There was something deeper forming, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch slightly. She looked away first, focusing on her stitching, but she could feel his eyes on her for several moments longer before he too returned to his work. The weather continued to improve, and on the 5th day after the storm, Nathan announced that he thought the trails were clear enough for him to ride to Aurora. I will leave at first light tomorrow, he said. I should be able to get there and back within the day, assuming no complications. I will tell your aunt you are safe and bring back any supplies we might need. Rebecca nodded, though she felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving, even for just a day. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice and the comfort of knowing he was near. That night she lay awake longer than usual, listening to Nathan's steady breathing from across the cabin and wondering what was happening to her. She had known this man for less than a week. She should not be feeling this pull toward him, this growing attachment that went beyond simple gratitude. It was not practical or sensible. She had plans, goals. She was supposed to be helping her aunt, building a new life in Aurora, not developing feelings for a solitary rancher who lived in a cabin in the mountains. And yet, When she closed her eyes, it was Nathan's face she saw. When she thought about the future, she found herself wondering if he might be in it. Nathan left before dawn, while Rebecca was still sleeping. She woke to find a note on the table explaining where he had gone and assuring her that he would return by evening. He had left water and food within easy reach, and the fire was built up to last for hours. Even in his absence, he was taking care of her. The day passed slowly. Rebecca found she missed him more than she wanted to admit. The cabin felt empty without his quiet presence. She dozed, mended more of his clothes, tried to read from the single book he had in the cabin, a worn copy of Ivanhoe, but found her thoughts wandering. Her ankle was definitely improving, the swelling down considerably, though it still hurt to put much weight on it. She practiced moving around the cabin a bit, using the wall for support, determined to regain her mobility. It was late afternoon when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped, and she moved as quickly as she could to the window. Nathan was riding up to the cabin, his horse loaded with supplies. Behind him, to her surprise, was a second horse, a pretty roan mare. He came inside, carrying saddlebags bulging with supplies and wearing an expression that was hard to read. "Your aunt sends her love and her relief that you are alive," he said, setting the bags on the table. "She also sent some clothes and personal items she thought you might need, and enough food to feed half of Badi, apparently." "What is the horse?" Rebecca asked. "From your aunt," Nathan said. "She insisted. Said you would need your own mount when you are well enough to travel. And she did not trust the livery and Bodhi anymore after they rented you a horse that threw you." "But how did she know the horse threw me?" Rebecca asked, confused. Nathan's expression darkened. "Because Thomas Wheeler is in Aurora. He showed up 2 days ago, spinning some story about how the storm separated you, and he had searched but could not find you, and assumed you had either made it to shelter or perished. Your aunt did not entirely believe him, apparently, but had no proof otherwise, until I arrived today and told her the truth about what he did." "What happened?" Rebecca asked, seeing the tension in Nathan's jaw. "Let us just say Wheeler will not be working as a guide anymore," Nathan said grimly. "Your aunt was not the only one who wanted words with him. Several men in town who knew your aunt took exception to his actions. By the time I left, he was being encouraged very strongly to leave Aurora and not come back." Rebecca felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction that Wheeler would face consequences, relief that he had not managed to completely escape responsibility, and a warm gratitude for Nathan and the others who had stood up for her. "Thank you," she said, "for telling the truth about what happened. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Nathan said simply. "A man who abandons a woman to die in a blizzard does not deserve to walk around free and unpunished. The law might not reach him, but common decency can." They spent the evening going through the supplies Martha had sent. There were 2 dresses, both simpler and more practical than the one Rebecca had been wearing when Nathan found her. There was a warm woolen coat, a heavy shawl, sturdy boots, undergarments, a hairbrush, and various other necessities. There were also several letters from Martha, full of relief and concern and gratitude toward Nathan for saving Rebecca's life. "She wants to meet you," Rebecca said, reading one of the letters. "She says any man brave and kind enough to risk his life in a blizzard to save her niece is someone she wants to thank properly. She invites us both to dinner at her boarding house once I am well enough to travel." "That is kind of her," Nathan said, "though I only did what anyone should do." "Not anyone," Rebecca said, looking up from the letter. "Thomas Wheeler did not, but you did. That says something about who you are." Nathan looked uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did when she thanked him. He changed the subject by asking if she wanted to try on the boots to make sure they fit, and the moment passed. But later that night, after they had both settled down to sleep, Rebecca lay in the darkness and thought about what Martha had written. Her aunt had ended the letter with a curious postscript. "Your Mr. Lawrence seems like a good man, the kind that is rare to find out here. Do not let him get away too quickly." Rebecca smiled in the darkness. "Trust Martha. to see what was developing even from a distance. Over the next week, as Rebecca's ankle continued to heal and the weather turned toward early spring, the relationship between them deepened. They had moved past the carefulness of strangers, past the formal gratitude of rescuer and rescued. They were becoming friends, and perhaps something more. Nathan taught her things about life in the mountains, pointing out through the cabin window different types of trees and explaining their uses, telling her about the animals that lived in these high elevations and how to read their tracks in the snow. Rebecca told him about books she had read, about history and poetry and ideas, and found that he was far more educated than his rough exterior might suggest. His father, it turned out, had been a school teacher before becoming a miner and had made sure Nathan learned to read and write and think critically. They discovered shared opinions on various subjects, from politics, both agreeing that the country was still healing from the war between the states and that the treatment of the freed slaves and the native tribes was shameful, to literature, both loving the works of Washington Irving, to philosophy, both believing that a person's character was shown through actions rather than words. They also discovered differences, but ones that complemented rather than conflicted. Rebecca was quick and passionate in her opinions, while Nathan was thoughtful and measured. She loved conversation and debate, while he preferred comfortable silence. She was naturally optimistic, seeing possibilities everywhere, while he was pragmatic, seeing obstacles that needed to be planned for. But somehow these differences fit together like pieces of a puzzle. It was on the 10th day after the storm, as Rebecca was practicing walking around the outside of the cabin with Nathan hovering nearby in case she fell, that she finally voiced what had been on her mind for days. "I am well enough to travel now," she said. The words felt heavy in her mouth, reluctant to be spoken. Nathan stopped walking. "Your ankle is much better, yes. If we take it slowly and carefully, you could ride to Aurora. My aunt must be eager to see me, and I am sure you are eager to have your cabin to yourself again and get back to your normal work." "Rebecca," Nathan said, and something in his tone made her stop and look at him. "I am in no hurry for you to leave." Her heart began to beat faster. "You are not?" He took a step closer to her. They were standing in the snow outside his cabin, the early March sun bright overhead, the sky an impossible blue. "These past weeks with you here have been the best I have had in a very long time. Maybe ever. I know it is not proper for me to say so, and I know you have your own plans in life, but I need you to know that before you go." Rebecca felt as if she could not quite catch her breath. "Nathan, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. If you want to go to Aurora and help your aunt, I understand. But if you wanted to stay or even just to visit sometimes, I would welcome that. I would welcome it more than I can say." Rebecca looked at him, at this strong, quiet man who had saved her life and then made her feel more alive than she had in years. She thought about Aurora, about the boarding house and helping Martha. But she also thought about this cabin, these mountains, this person standing in front of her with such naked hope in his eyes. "I have felt it too," she said softly. "This connection between us. I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or the circumstance of being thrown together. But it is more than that. You are more than that." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "What do we do about it?" he asked. "I do not know," Rebecca admitted. "I still need to see my aunt. She is expecting me, and I owe her that much after she went to the trouble and expense of bringing me out here. But perhaps after I have spent some time in Aurora, after we have had some time apart to be sure this is real and not just the intensity of the situation, we could see each other again." "I could visit you in Aurora," Nathan said. "Once a week, maybe. It is not such a long ride. And you could come here when you wanted. If you wanted." "I would want," Rebecca said, and smiled at him. Nathan smiled back, that rare, warm smile that transformed his face, and Rebecca felt her heart turnover in her chest. They stood there in the snow, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools, and Rebecca thought that she had never been happier. They traveled to Aurora 2 days later, taking it slow because of Rebecca's ankle. Nathan rode beside her the whole way, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the region. They stopped frequently to rest, and Nathan insisted on helping her on and off her horse, his hands gentle and careful. Martha's boarding house was a large, sturdy building on the main street of Aurora, which was itself a smaller and quieter version of Bodie. Martha herself was a woman in her 50s, plump and energetic, with graying hair and a no-nonsense air about her. She swept Rebecca into a crushing hug the moment she dismounted, exclaiming over her thinness and her pallor and demanding to know if Nathan had been feeding her properly. "I fed her everything I had," Nathan said, clearly amused by Martha's forceful personality. "She was half frozen when I found her. It takes time to recover from that." Martha turned her formidable attention to Nathan, looking him up and down with sharp eyes. "So, you are the man who saved my niece's life. Well, you are certainly tall enough, and you have an honest face. Come inside, both of you. I have stew on and fresh bread, and I will not hear any arguments." Over dinner, with several of Martha's boarders joining them, the full story of Rebecca's ordeal and rescue came out. Nathan tried to downplay his role, but Rebecca would not let him. She told them everything: how Wheeler had abandoned her, how she had fallen into the ravine, how Nathan had heard her calling and found her in the dark and the snow, how he had brought her to his cabin and cared for her and kept her alive. "You are a hero, Mr. Lawrence," one of the boarders said, raising his glass, "to the hero of the Sierra Nevada." Nathan looked uncomfortable with the toast, but he accepted it graciously. Under the table, Rebecca felt him reach for her hand and squeeze it gently before letting go. After dinner, Martha shooed everyone else away and sat down with Rebecca and Nathan at the kitchen table. "All right," she said. "Now tell me the truth. What is going on between you two?" Rebecca felt her face flame. "Aunt Martha." "Do not Aunt Martha me," Martha said. "I have eyes. I saw how you look at each other, and I am not saying there is anything wrong with it. I just want to know where things stand." Rebecca glanced at Nathan, who looked as embarrassed as she felt, but also slightly amused. "We have become close," Rebecca said carefully. "We are going to see each other, to court properly, I suppose. Nathan will visit here, and I will visit his cabin, with your permission." "My permission is given freely," Martha said. "Mr. Lawrence, what are your intentions toward my niece?" "Honorable ones," Nathan said firmly. "I care for Rebecca deeply. I would like to court her properly and see where things lead between us." Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That is what I wanted to hear. Rebecca, you are welcome to stay here as long as you like. You can help me with the boarding house or not, as you choose. And Mr. Lawrence, you are welcome here any time. I suspect you will be visiting frequently." She was right. Over the next 3 months, as winter gave way to spring and spring to early summer, Nathan rode to Aurora every week without fail. Sometimes he stayed just a few hours, having a meal with Rebecca and Martha, and perhaps taking a walk with Rebecca through town. Other times he stayed overnight, sleeping in one of Martha's guest rooms, and spending a full day with Rebecca. They talked for hours, getting to know each other in ways that went beyond the intense but limited interaction of the cabin. Rebecca learned about Nathan's dreams for his ranch, his plans to expand his herd, and perhaps even try breeding some horses. Nathan learned about Rebecca's love of teaching and her frustration with the limited options available to women who wanted careers. They discovered more shared interests and more complementary differences. They also had their first argument, a heated discussion about whether the Transcontinental Railroad was ultimately good or bad for the West, but they worked through it and found that the disagreement had not damaged their relationship, but rather strengthened it by proving they could navigate conflict together. Rebecca also visited Nathan's cabin 3 times during those months, each visit carefully chaperoned by Martha or one of the other respectable women from town to preserve propriety. She met his cattle, helped him with various tasks around the property, and fell more in love with the mountain landscape with each visit. There was something about the high country, the thin air and the vast views, and the sense of being close to the sky that spoke to something deep in her soul. By June, they both knew where things were heading. It was Nathan who finally raised the subject on a warm evening in late June as they sat on the porch of Martha's boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I want to marry you," he said, with his characteristic directness. "I know it has only been a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are everything I never knew I needed, Rebecca. You make me want to be better, do more. You make me happy in a way I did not think was possible. Will you marry me?" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Nathan Lawrence." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small but lovely sapphire set in it. "It was my mother's," he said as he slid it onto her finger. "The only thing of hers that my father kept. He gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to a woman who deserved it. You deserve it, Rebecca. You deserve everything." They married in August of 1876 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Aurora. Martha cried happy tears throughout the entire service. A dozen of Nathan's fellow ranchers and miners came, as did many of Martha's boarders and friends from town. It was not a fancy society wedding like Rebecca might have had back in Philadelphia, but it was warm and genuine, and that mattered more. Their wedding night was spent in the cabin that would now be their primary home. Nathan had spent the previous month making improvements, adding a proper bedroom with a real bed and a door for privacy, installing glass windows to let in more light, and building additional storage and shelves. It was still rustic by city standards, but it was sturdy and comfortable in theirs. Rebecca had been nervous about the intimacies of marriage, as any properly raised woman would be, but Nathan was patient and gentle with her. He took his time, making sure she was comfortable and reassured, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt natural and right, an extension of the emotional intimacy they had already built. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Nathan's arms around her and her head on his chest, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace and rightness. This was where she was meant to be. Not in Philadelphia teaching other people's daughters, not even in Aurora helping her aunt. Here in this cabin in the mountains with this good man who loved her. "Are you happy?" Nathan murmured into her hair. "More than I have ever been," Rebecca answered honestly. "Are you? I did not know what happiness really was until I found you dying in the snow," Nathan said. "Strange, is it not? The worst day of your life led to the best thing in mine." "The worst day of my life, too," Rebecca agreed. "And the beginning of the best thing. I suppose that is how life works sometimes. You have to go through the blizzard to find the warmth." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and if Rebecca dreamed of snow and cold and fear, it did not matter, because she woke to warmth and safety and love. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Living in the high country was hard work, especially for Rebecca, who had to learn skills she had never needed in Philadelphia. Nathan taught her how to milk the cow he had acquired, how to tend the chickens, how to preserve food for the winter, how to shoot a rifle in case she needed to defend herself or hunt for food while he was away checking on distant cattle. She taught herself how to cook more than just basic meals, experimenting with the ingredients available and occasionally failing spectacularly, but Nathan ate everything she made without complaint. She also continued to read voraciously, ordering books through the general store in Aurora and building up their small library. Nathan would often find her sitting by the window in the afternoon light, absorbed in some volume of poetry or history or philosophy. Sometimes she would read passages aloud to him as he worked on various projects, and he would listen intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he was thinking deeply about what she had read. The isolation was harder than Rebecca had expected at times. There were stretches, especially in the winter, when they might not see another person for weeks. But Nathan was good company, and Rebecca discovered she had a talent for solitude that she had not known she possessed. She began writing, first just in a journal, documenting their daily life, but then attempting poetry and even the beginnings of a novel. She shared these attempts with Nathan, who read them carefully and offered thoughtful feedback. They visited Aurora about once a month, staying with Martha and catching up on news and supplies. Rebecca always enjoyed these visits, the chance to talk with other women and to feel part of a community again. But she also always felt a pull to return to the cabin, to the quiet and the mountains, and Nathan. In the spring of 1877, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. The nearest doctor was in Aurora, hours away, and childbirth in the remote mountain cabin seemed suddenly like a frightening prospect. But Nathan reassured her, promising that they would go to Aurora well before her time and stay with Martha until after the baby was born. That was exactly what they did. In late October, when Rebecca was in her 8th month, they made the journey to Aurora and settled into Martha's boarding house. Martha was beside herself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a great aunt and immediately began knitting tiny clothes and blankets. Their son was born on November 15th, 1877, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next morning. Nathan stayed with Rebecca the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her brow and whispering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and loud, Nathan wept openly, holding his son with trembling hands and looking at Rebecca as if she had performed a miracle. They named him Thomas after Nathan's father, with the middle name Martin after Rebecca's own father who had died when she was young. Thomas Martin Lawrence came into the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect, and both his parents fell instantly and completely in love with him. They stayed in Aurora through the winter, giving Rebecca time to recover and Thomas time to grow a bit before facing the journey to the mountain cabin. It was a happy time, despite the exhaustion that came with caring for a newborn. Martha doted on the baby, and the other boarders took turns holding him and making silly faces to try to make him smile. In April of 1878, when Thomas was nearly 5 months old, they made the journey back to the cabin. Nathan had been up several times during the winter to check on things and make sure everything was secure. Now, as they arrived with their son, Rebecca saw that he had made more improvements. There was a cradle waiting in the bedroom, beautifully carved from pine. There was a rocking chair by the fireplace. There was more storage for all the things a baby required. Life with a baby in the remote cabin was challenging but rewarding. Thomas was a good baby overall, sleeping reasonably well and growing strong. Rebecca marveled at how naturally Nathan took to fatherhood, how gentle and patient he was with their son despite his large, rough hands. She would often find him holding Thomas and talking to him in a low voice, telling him about the mountains and the cattle and the land he would one day inherit. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, he became a constant presence in their daily work. Rebecca would wear him on her back in a sling while she did chores. Nathan built a small pen where Thomas could play safely while they worked outside. The cabin rang with the sounds of his laughter and babbling, and both parents agreed that they had never heard better music. In the spring of 1880, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, having been through it once before, though she was more tired, chasing after an active 2-year-old while growing another baby. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and more aches, but Nathan picked up the slack without complaint, taking over many of Rebecca's usual tasks. They went to Aurora again in October, and on the 1st of November, Rebecca gave birth to their daughter. The labor was shorter but more intense, and when it was over, Rebecca held a tiny girl with dark hair like Nathan's and demanded to know where the lusty cries of her son had gone, because this little one was remarkably quiet. "She is just taking it all in," Nathan said, cradling his daughter. "She is thinking before she acts, careful and thoughtful. She is going to be just like her mother." They named her Sarah Grace Lawrence, Sarah after Nathan's mother and Grace, because Rebecca, said that the baby had come into the world with such easy grace compared to the dramatic entrance her brother had made. With two children, the cabin was full in the best possible way. Thomas adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, though his help often created more work than it saved. But Rebecca and Nathan encouraged his involvement, knowing that the bond between the siblings would be important in their isolated life. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas and Sarah grew from babies to children. Nathan expanded the ranch, carefully and slowly, making it more prosperous. Rebecca continued her writing, and after several years of attempts and rejections, managed to get some of her poems published in a Sacramento newspaper under her name, Rebecca Lawrence. It was a small triumph, but it mattered to her, this proof that she could be both a wife and mother and still have an identity beyond those roles. They made improvements to the cabin over the years, eventually adding a second bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen area. It would never be a fancy house, but it was comfortable and warm and full of love, and that was all that mattered. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting the cabin several times a year and hosting them in Aurora regularly. She was a beloved grandmother figure to Thomas and Sarah, spoiling them with treats and gifts whenever she saw them. In the summer of 1884, Martha was diagnosed with a tumor by the doctor in Aurora. She died that October, peacefully in her sleep, and Rebecca mourned her deeply. But she took comfort in knowing that Martha had lived to see Rebecca happy and settled, had known her great niece and great nephew, and had died knowing that the niece she had brought west had found the life she was meant for. In 1886, when Thomas was 8 and Sarah was 6, Rebecca gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named Matthew Aaron Lawrence. Matthew was a surprise, arriving several years after they had assumed their family was complete, but he was no less loved for that. Thomas and Sarah took to their new brother immediately, the older children delighting in helping care for the baby. As the children grew, Nathan and Rebecca worked together to educate them. Rebecca taught them reading and writing and arithmetic, using the growing collection of books in their cabin as resources. Nathan taught them practical skills: how to ride, how to care for animals, how to read the weather and the land. The children were growing up wild and free in the mountains, and while they lacked the formal education and social polish of city children, they were bright and capable and deeply knowledgeable about the world around them. In 1890, Thomas turned 13 and began to really work alongside his father, learning the ranching business in earnest. He had Nathan's build and Rebecca's quick mind, and he took to the work naturally. Sarah, at 11, was proving to have a gift with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse with patience and soft words. Matthew, at 4, was still too young for serious work, but he followed his siblings everywhere, determined not to be left out. The world beyond their mountain cabin was changing rapidly. The frontier was closing. They heard in Aurora, with more and more land being settled and civilized. The wild days of the West were fading into history. But in their high valley, life continued much as it always had, ruled by the rhythms of nature and the work of the seasons rather than the march of progress. On their 15th wedding anniversary in August of 1891, Nathan and Rebecca left the children with a neighboring ranching family for a few days and returned to the cabin alone. It was strange to be there without the constant noise and activity of the children, but also peaceful. They spent the evening sitting on the porch Nathan had built a few years earlier, watching the sun set over the peaks and reflecting on the years that had passed. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Marrying me, I mean. Living up here instead of in a town or city where life would be easier." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not once." "Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure," Nathan said. "You could have had a different life, an easier life. You could have married some merchant or professional in Philadelphia or Sacramento. You could have had a house with wallpaper and china dishes and neighbors close by." Rebecca took his hand and held it tightly. "I could have had a lot of things," she agreed. but none of them would have made me happy the way this life has, the way you have. You saved me, Nathan, not just from the blizzard, but from a life that was slowly suffocating me. You gave me freedom and partnership and adventure. You gave me three beautiful children and a home I love. You gave me yourself, which is the greatest gift of all. Nathan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You saved me too, he said. I was half alive before you came into my life, just going through the motions, existing, but not really living. You brought color and warmth and meaning to everything. You gave me a family and a reason to build something that would last beyond just my own life. I love you more now than I did 15 years ago, and I loved you desperately then. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. After a while, Rebecca spoke again. Do you remember what I said to you on our wedding night about having to go through the blizzard to find the warmth? I remember everything about our wedding night, Nathan said with a smile in his voice. Rebecca laughed. Well, I have been thinking about that. It is true, but it is not complete. It is not just that you have to go through the blizzard to find the warmth. It is that the blizzard makes you appreciate the warmth more. All the struggles we have had, all the challenges and hardships and difficulties of this life, they have made the good things sweeter. They have made us stronger, both individually and together. You are absolutely right, Nathan said. I would not change a single thing about our life, not even the hard parts. They all led us here to this moment, and I am grateful for every single one. They went inside as full darkness fell and made love in the bedroom they had shared for 15 years with all the passion and tenderness that had only deepened with time. The years continued to roll forward. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility for the ranch. In 1894, at 17, he began courting a girl from Aurora, the daughter of one of the town's merchants, and by 1895 they were engaged. Sarah, at 15, was being pursued by several young men, though she showed little interest in any of them, more concerned with training horses than finding a husband. Matthew, at 9, was growing tall and showing signs of having inherited his father's steady temperament. In the spring of 1896, 20 years after Nathan had found Rebecca dying in the snow, they attended Thomas's wedding in Aurora. It was a bittersweet moment, watching their oldest child start his own life, but also joyful. Thomas and his bride planned to settle on a portion of Nathan's land, building their own home and eventually taking over the ranching operation when Nathan was ready to step back. After the wedding, Nathan and Rebecca took a rare trip, just the two of them, riding up into the high country to the place where Nathan had found Rebecca all those years ago. The ravine was still there, of course, unchanged by time. They stood looking down at it, both silent for a long moment. I still have nightmares sometimes, Rebecca admitted, about being lost in the storm, about thinking I was going to die alone in the snow. I have nightmares too, Nathan said, about what would have happened if I had not heard you calling, if I had decided the wind was playing tricks and not investigated, if I had been just a few minutes later. But you did hear me, Rebecca said firmly. And you did investigate, and you were not too late. We cannot live in the fear of what might have been. We can only be grateful for what is. Nathan pulled her close, and they stood together at the edge of the ravine, holding each other as they had so many times over the past 20 years. I am grateful every single day, Nathan said into her hair, for that storm, for that moment, for every moment since. They stayed up in the high country for 2 more days, camping out under the stars like they had done before the children came along, talking and laughing and making love in their bedroll. It was a reminder of who they had been when they first fell in love and a celebration of who they had become together. When they returned to the cabin, Sarah greeted them with news that she had been offered a position training horses at a large ranch near Sacramento. She wanted to take it, wanted to see something of the world beyond the mountains, but she was worried about leaving them. Nathan and Rebecca assured her that they supported whatever decision she made, that they wanted her to follow her dreams as they had followed theirs. Sarah left that summer, promising to write every week and visit when she could. The cabin felt empty without her energy, but Rebecca and Nathan adapted. They still had Matthew at home, and Thomas and his wife visited frequently, and in the spring of 1897, they became grandparents when Thomas's wife gave birth to a baby girl they named Martha, after the great aunt who had brought Rebecca west. Being grandparents brought new joy to Nathan and Rebecca's life. They doted on little Martha, taking every opportunity to see her and spoil her. Matthew, at 11, was fascinated by his new niece, careful and gentle with her in a way that made Rebecca's heart swell with pride. In 1899, Sarah returned from Sacramento with a husband in tow, a horse trainer she had met and fallen in love with. They settled in Aurora, opening a stable and training business together. That same year, Thomas and his wife had a son, Nathan Lawrence II. The family was growing and spreading out, but they remained close, gathering for holidays and celebrations and helping each other through difficulties. As the new century dawned in 1900, Nathan and Rebecca found themselves in their 40s, no longer young but not yet old, with a life rich in love and family and accomplishment. They had been married 24 years, and their love had not diminished but rather had deepened and matured, becoming something solid and unshakable. Matthew, at 14, was beginning to think about his own future. Unlike Thomas, he was not particularly interested in ranching. Unlike Sarah, he had no special gift with animals, but he loved books and learning, taking after his mother in that way. He talked about perhaps becoming a teacher or even going to college, though that would mean leaving the mountains for a while. Nathan and Rebecca encouraged him, just as they had encouraged their other children. They had learned that loving someone meant letting them find their own path, even if that path led away from you for a time. In the summer of 1901, on a warm August evening, very much like the one 25 years earlier when Nathan had proposed, they sat together on their porch and reflected on the life they had built. 25 years, Rebecca marveled. A quarter of a century since we married. More than that since you found me. Best decision I ever made, Nathan said, stopping to investigate that sound I heard, searching for you in that storm. Best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca said, nearly dying in a blizzard if you can believe it, because it brought me to you. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as the stars came out overhead. 3 children raised, 2 of them married and starting their own families. A ranch that was thriving. A love that had weathered all storms and only grown stronger. A life that had been built from a moment of disaster into something beautiful and lasting. What do you think happens next? Rebecca asked. We have raised our children. The ranch is established. What do we do now? Nathan smiled. We live, he said simply. We watch our grandchildren grow. We help our children when they need it. We take care of each other. We keep finding reasons to laugh and to love. We make the most of whatever time we have left together. That sounds perfect, Rebecca said. And it was. The years that followed were good ones. Matthew did indeed go to college, attending the University of California in Berkeley, though he came home every summer and ultimately returned after graduation to teach at the school in Aurora. Thomas took over the majority of the ranching operation, allowing Nathan to step back and take things easier, though Nathan never fully retired. He was still out working with the cattle and maintaining the property well into his 50s. Sarah and her husband had 3 children of their own and built a successful horse training business that had clients from all over California and Nevada. Rebecca continued to write, publishing more poetry, and eventually a volume of essays about life in the high country that found a modest but appreciative audience. She also mentored Matthew's teaching, helping him develop curriculum and sharing her own experiences from her years as a teacher in Philadelphia. Nathan and Rebecca became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family clan, the center around which everyone else orbited. The cabin that had once sheltered just 2 people now regularly hosted gatherings of children and grandchildren, filled with noise and laughter and love. They added on to it again, building a larger common area that could accommodate everyone, though Nathan joked that they would need a whole new building if the family kept growing at this rate. In 1910, they celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children's spouses, and six grandchildren ranging in age from 13 down to 2. It was a chaotic, joyful celebration, and that night, after everyone had finally settled down to sleep in various corners of the cabin and the additional tent set up outside, Nathan and Rebecca lay in their bed and listened to the sounds of their family all around them. "We did well," Nathan whispered. "We did," Rebecca agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They fell asleep holding hands, as they had every night for 34 years. The end came quietly and peacefully many years later. Nathan passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1923 at the age of 71, with Rebecca holding his hand. He had lived a full, rich life, and he died in the cabin he had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Rebecca mourned him deeply but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, and in the memories of a love that had sustained her for nearly 5 decades. She lived another 7 years, passing away in her sleep in 1930, just shy of her 77th birthday. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the cabin with a simple stone marker that read, "Nathan Lawrence and Rebecca Vaughn Lawrence. He found her in the storm." They found each other in life, forever together. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. The ranch continued to operate, run by Nathan and Rebecca's descendants. And the story of how their love began with a blizzard and a desperate search and a cowboy who refused to give up was told and retold at family gatherings. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most frightening moments, and that true love can weather any storm.